If you have your Bibles this morning, join me in turning to the book of Exodus. Genesis, Exodus. Second book of the Bible, very easy to find. Exodus chapter 15. One of the things we understand as we read the Bible is that in these pages we have about 4,000 years worth of history. And as we read, we're only focusing on certain highlights during that 4,000 years. We sort of like just looking at headlines of the newspaper and not reading every little thing in the newspaper. There's so many more ordinary, unimpressive, mundane things happen during that 4,000 years than just the highlights that are recorded in the Scripture. As Amy reminded us in her song, often we overlook the blessings that God has for us in the very mundane, ordinary events of daily life. And the pitfall we face is that sometimes we think in life we're going to go from one plateau to the next, is from victory to victory to victory to victory. And we forget that after every mountaintop, there comes a valley. And many times we live long times in the valley. Especially we get tripped up when we look for the sensational, because you turn on the TV, you listen on the radio, you hear the televangelists, and be with us. Now, make sure you're with us next week, because we've got one of the biggest prophecies. This news is so exciting you can't miss next week. And we think, oh, I got to tune in. I wonder what it's going to be. And we live for this excitement, the sensation. When we read the story of Moses, we go from his birth as a child and everything going on in Pharaoh's household, and then we come to the Exodus events and the burning bush and coming back, let my people go, and the plagues. And we forget that there are 40 years of tending the herds in the desert. Kicking rocks around while all the animals are grazing. Take them out in the morning, bring them back at night. No miracles, no burning bushes. Yes, there was one at the end of that 40 years. But it's not like it was a weekly occurrence for Moses. No parting of the waters, no manna on the ground. When we think of Moses, we think of these great miraculous events. But we forget the 40 years of the daily grind. And the reality is we live most of our life in the daily grind and not in the sensational victory. Here in Exodus chapter 15, we see the Jews as they come through the Exodus event. They come through the parting of the Red Sea and they come to the other side. In our lives, it's often easy for us to get discouraged when God doesn't work the way we expect Him to. And back in May, it was, we had a sermon about complaining, looking at the Jews, looking at the reasons people complain. And as you look in the Exodus account, the book of Numbers actually in that sermon, we saw people complain because they faced hardships. They wanted life easier. They wanted meat. They weren't content with what God provided. They complained because of personalities and prejudice. They were jealous. Because of the giants, the obstacles they faced, they were afraid. Because everyone else was complaining. They went along with the crowd. Because of the leadership, they were defiant. Because of the consequences of their complaining. When God punished them, they thought God was unfair. And over and over and over and over again, we see this pattern of complaining. Here in Exodus 15, as we often do throughout the wilderness account, we find the people complaining. These are God's people, the Jews who have just understood, just received miraculous deliverance. But it's because of their disappointment. They start complaining because of their thirst. Verse 22, Exodus 15:22, it says, Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That's why the place is called Marah. which means bitter. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" And Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. Then the Lord made a decree and a law for them, and there he tested them. He said, "If you listen to the Lord your God, and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians. For I am the Lord who heals you." Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped near the water. Let's pray together. Father, as we read this account of the complaining, we want to understand your message to us. And so we pray that you would speak to our hearts and give us encouragement through your word this morning. In Jesus' name. How do you handle grumbling and complaining? We often let it build discouragement and disappointment in our hearts. Negativity in others affects us all. Whenever we're around somebody negative, it's easy for us to turn to become negative as well. We see great disappointment of Moses and the people. And we learn some truths here in these verses that help us deal with disappointment. The first truth is great success is often followed by failure. When we have a mountaintop experience, often we need to be prepared for the valley that will follow. Verse 22, it says, Moses led the people from the Red Sea. You remember what happened at the Red Sea? They were trapped at the edge of the Red Sea with no place to go. God had brought the plagues on Egypt. During the 10th plague, Pharaoh says, "Fine, everybody leave." All the Jews left. They went up to the edge of the Red Sea, and here is this massive sea blocking their way. Pharaoh said, "Hey, can we just let go all of our help? Who's going to do the work now?" And so he got all the armies, all their chariots, and here comes this massive army thundering after the Jews to bring them back into captivity once again. But God intervened. He stood between the army and the Jews. Blinding the army, they couldn't see the Jews. Moses held his rod out over the waters. An east wind came back all night long and blew the waters apart. You say, "You don't really believe that, do you?" Yes, I do. I believe in the miraculous power of God to work. And that night the waters parted, the Jews went through on dry ground. As they're getting out on the other side, suddenly God gets out of the way. And Pharaoh's army comes charging after them to catch them before they get over the other side. God knocks the wheels off their chariots, traps them in the middle, and all the waves come crashing upon them, drowning all of Pharaoh's army. God brought the Jews out with a hand raised in victory. They had seen God work so powerfully for them. But not every day is a day of triumph. They went into the desert, and for 3 days they traveled around looking for water, not finding any water. And they were quick to criticize their leader, Moses. If you study the book of Exodus, you see they criticized his leadership, they doubted his decisions, they questioned his motives. In this story, they say, it would have been better to have died in Egypt. There was a water problem. First water problem they had, there was too much water, they couldn't part the Red Sea, God intervened. Then they come through and there's no water, and finally when they find the water, it's bitter water. They can't drink it. Moses had 3 million thirsty people, probably 1 million, 2 million thirsty cattle here. He's got a major problem. 3 days earlier, they had seen God work so powerfully at the parting of the Red Sea. And they were singing and dancing, laughing at Pharaoh's army that got drowned in the sea. They were celebrating the victory. 3 days later, they're struggling. They're complaining. They're discouraged. They're ready to leave Moses and go back to Egypt. Each day in our life will bring new challenges. You find that all throughout Scripture, that will go from mountaintop to valley experience. 1 Kings 18. Elijah is up on Mount Carmel challenging the prophets of Baal. God sends fire down from heaven. and shows that he is the one true God. 1 Kings 19, though, Jezebel says, I'm going to get that Elijah. And he's running for his life, scared of this week. He says, God, I've had enough. Take away my life. I'm ready to die. Think about the Battle of Jericho. And they come into the Promised Land. The Jews come into the Promised Land. Here's this massive fortified city, these massive walls. They march around 7 times a day, 7 days. Once around for 6 days. The 7th day, they march around 7 times. They shout, and God knocks the walls down. Great victory. A few days later, they come to this little small hole-in-the-wall town called Ai. And they face great defeat. So many times we go from great victory to great defeat. And when we're not living in the times of victory, it's so easy for us to get discouraged, to get frustrated, to want to give up. They come to, here in Exodus 15, they come to a place called Marah. The name means bitter. Bitter waters. They couldn't drink. It's a place of difficulty, a time of discouragement, a time of disappointment. First question to ask yourself this morning is, what is the Marah in your life? What are you facing right now that is the battle, that is the discouragement that has you where you want to give up? Has you complaining, blaming God, blaming people, blaming everybody else? What is the disappointment you're facing? Because Satan wants to use it to cause us to be defeated, to keep us back from serving God wholeheartedly. 3 different sources of disappointment we find. Number 1, things will disappoint us. Few things really ever measure up to be all that we hope them to be. You know, you turn on QVC Shopping Network and you see, oh, this beautiful diamond ring. Well, it's a faux diamond ring, which means fake. And you say, oh, that's so beautiful. I want to order it. And it comes in the mail, and here's this little tiny thing. And you think, oh, that's hardly worth the first payment, let alone the 10 more payments I've got to pay for this. Things disappoint us. Events disappoint us. Things turn out wrong. Experiences aren't all they're cracked up to be. We plan and plan and plan for this big football game or this big concert or big outing or whatever it is, and then we get there and we're so let down. Events let us down. But by and large, the biggest one, people let us down. They betray us. They criticize us. They don't come through for us. When we think we need them the most, they're not there. They're disloyal. They don't fulfill their promises. This is the most common type of disappointment. You try to help somebody, and they're not grateful. And they criticize you for the effort you made in their behalf. Moses faces time and time again with the Jews. He sought to help them, and they weren't happy. They weren't grateful. They just kept on complaining. Think in your life, what are the marvels you're facing? What are the bitterness, the times of disappointment? Identify. But then we ask the question, why does God allow us to go through these times? Why does God allow the maras in our life? We look down at verse 25 and we find the answer. It says, there the Lord made a decree, and there he tested them. God allows the maras in our life, these difficult times, in order to test us. God had brought them through this great experience of the parting of the Red Sea. And 3 days later, they're in this difficult time, this bitter experience with no water to drink. God allowed the Mara to test whether they really trusted God. And do they really trust me or not? It says that God allowed the Mara experience to test them. It doesn't say that about the Red Sea experience, but it does say it about Mara. Our character is not tested in the great spectacular successes as much as it is in the everyday events of life. In what we do every day, in the difficult days, in the struggling days, in the times of discouragement and disappointment. It's always easy to praise God and worship God and be faithful to God when you get blessing after blessing after blessing. But it's so much more a test of our character. Are we going to keep on trusting God when things get difficult? When we pray and we don't see his answers. when we don't sense His direction in our life. It's easy to praise God at the mountaintop. It's hard to be faithful in the valley. Disappointment says a lot about us. It shows us what our reactions are, what our motivations are. Israel's response was to complain and gripe and grumble and criticize their leader because they were incredibly immature. Disappointments always reveal what's going on in our hearts. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Many times, just like Amy said in that song, God allows the disappointments to pull us to Himself. Because when everything's going well, we don't have time for God. But when we face hardship, we see how much we truly need God's help in our life. So we need to be prepared, because great success is often followed by failure. The second thing we see is that great service is often followed by forgetfulness. Verse 24 says, "So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, 'What are we to drink?'" It's amazing how short of a memory these Jews had. It's only 3 days after this great miraculous power of God, and only a few days more since all those plagues upon Egypt. All the waters in Egypt were blood. The Jews had nice, fresh, clean water to drink. Frogs were all over the land of Egypt. Up in Goshen where the Jews lived, no frogs. And in every plague, God protected the Jews. You think they would have learned our God is great, we can trust our God. But 3 days after this Red Sea experience, they're back grumbling, complaining, criticizing. They have a very short memory. You know, it's, "Moses, what have you done for us? Where's our water? We're here, we're thirsty. Where's our water?" So many times, we are quick to be forgetful. Greatest successes are often followed by failure. Greatest services are often followed by forgetfulness. It's amazing how quickly people forget what we've done for them. But sadly, when we look in the mirror, it's amazing how quick we are to forget what others have done for us. Children forget what their parents have done. Bosses forget how their employee went that extra mile of working overtime on a special project. Spouses take each other for granted. Question for each one of us to ask: who have we taken for granted? Who have we failed to truly appreciate? Who have we forgotten how they've been there for us? Maybe it's just a friend who's always been there to pray with you, to encourage you, lift them up. Maybe God says, you need to thank them. Let them know how much you appreciate them. So what do you do when you're being forgotten? What do you do when you've given your all for others and they take you for granted? They show no appreciation. They just grumble and complain because you're not doing more. What do we do when we face all these negative emotions welling up inside our hearts? Number one, don't curse it. Don't retaliate. When somebody doesn't give us the appreciation, it's easy for us to say, well, fine. And we have all these negative emotions that we want to lash out at them. Don't curse it. Typical response of most of us, if we were in Moses' position, he would have said, fine, find your way back to Egypt. Get across the Red Sea on your own. I'm going on the promised land. You can go back to the sea. You can wander in the desert, but I'm going off on my own. And he would have walked away if it were me, not Moses. In fact, you know what? God even said, Moses, I'll tell you what, these people are so ornery, so stubborn. I'll wipe them out. I'll start over with you. Moses said, God, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Don't curse it. So many times when we're hurt by others, we look for ways to get these barbs in them, get back at them, to stab them back. But instead of revenge, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. We don't take revenge because that's God's place. Instead, we need to turn around to be a blessing. Instead of cursing others, we bless them. Romans 12:14 says, Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. The opposite of cursing is blessing. That means you speak positively to those who are speaking negatively toward you. You build up those who are tearing you down. You seek to encourage the very people who are discouraging you. Moses didn't curse them. Number two, don't rehearse it. Don't curse it. Don't rehearse it. Don't just keep going over it and over it again, reliving all that pain and hurt. Job 5:2 says, resentment kills a fool, and envy slays the simple. When you've got resentment, you're focusing on the past. Ephesians 4:31 says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, and slander, along with every form of malice. You don't rehearse it, you get rid of it. Every time you review a time, even if it's a good person, somebody in the church said or did something that hurt you, every time you rehearse it, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And we feel that hurt and pain and discouragement so much more. It's blown all out of proportion. It gets magnified every time we rehearse it. Don't curse it. Don't rehearse it. Third, don't nurse it. Don't take it personally. Don't have a pity party for yourself. Don't allow it to make you negative. Moses could have done this, but he didn't. Ephesians 4:26-27. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. Do not give the devil a foot. It's okay to be angry. It's a legitimate response, but we need to deal with it. Don't take it to bed. You might be angry for a while, but get over it. Release it. Job 18:4 says, you tear yourself to pieces in your anger. Whenever we focus on our anger, we hold on to that, it tears us apart. It's not hurting the person we're angry with. It destroys us. So what do you do when you're disappointed? Number one, you disperse it. Use rhyming words here. Number one, you disperse it. Let it go. Get rid of it. Verse 24, when the people came and grumbled against Moses, what are we to drink? Then Moses cried out to the Lord. And the Lord showed him a piece of wood, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. Moses didn't cry out to the people. He didn't lash back at the people. He didn't take his frustration out to the people. He turns to the Lord, and he cries out to God. Don't take your frustrations out on people. It's so easy when somebody comes to you and they're raving, they're complaining, to lash back with all of your complaints as well. Well, you've got a problem. Let me tell you, you haven't been doing this. You've let me down. And we want to lash out. Instead, we see Moses' example. He cried out to the God. Doesn't say anything back to people. He just turns to God and asks God for his help. You disperse your hurt. You give it to God. You let it go. You don't hang on to it. One of my favorite verses, I learned as a little child, 1 Peter 5:7. Casting all your cares on him, for he careth for you. NIV says, cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. So when we face this frustration, when we face this disappointment, this ungratitude, we disperse it, we release it, we go to the Lord. And number two, let God reverse it. Allow God, when we turn our cares over to him, allow him to bring good as a result. One of the best examples in the whole Bible is the story of Joseph. His brothers hate him. They want to kill him. They end up selling him to slavery. He goes off to Egypt as a slave in Potiphar's household. He does the right thing. When he's tempted to have sex with Potiphar's wife, he refuses. As a result, he's thrown in jail. He sits in jail there. He waits and waits and waits. But finally, God brings him out, sets him second in the land, and God uses Joseph to spare the whole world. As his brothers come back from Genesis 15:20, 20 years later, he says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. If there was anybody who had a reason to feel this hurt and bitterness and resentment, it was Joseph. But instead he says, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. God is turning around your evil to bring about good. When we release to God, when we turn to God, all the bitterness, all the complaining, all the resentment, all the anger, God can turn it around and bring about good in our lives. are really his appointments. There are opportunities for God to work. When we will take our problems and turn to God with them, release them to God, God can bring about good. Romans 8:28, we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. We understand that God allows these situations in our life. Not saying that God wants to bring about the bad situations, but that God allows them because when we turn to God with them, he can bring about good. We can choose to be bitter or better. God can bring about good when we release our problems to him. Because Moses responded correctly, we see what God does for Moses. Moses didn't curse it, he didn't rehearse it, he didn't nurse it. He said he gave it to God, and he dispersed it. And God reversed the problem. Verse 25, it says, God showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water became sweet. God provided the solution, but it was there all the time. It doesn't say that God miraculously created a piece of wood or God miraculously made the waters good again. He showed him a piece of wood that he threw into the water. The wood was there all the time. But Moses doesn't see it until he turns to God. So many times, we're so focused on our disappointment, on our frustration, on the hurt, the pain, the anger, that we don't see the solution that God has right in front of us the whole time. God has already prepared the situation. He's ready to work when we will turn to him and trust him. You'll never see God's solution as long as you're wallowing in self-pity. As long as we're just focused on the problem and focused on holding on to it and cursing and nursing and feeling all that anger and frustration, we're never going to see the solution that God already has for us. But when we turn it over to God, that's when God can work. 3 lessons from Moses. Great success is often followed by great failure. Great service is often followed by forgetfulness. Third, the greatest shortages are often followed by fullness. Verse 27. After this experience, it says, they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. Basically, they've been in the middle of the Mojave Desert, and now, just a couple days later, they're Palm Springs. Everything is wonderful. It is an oasis in the middle of the desert. They've been in Sinai, in the desert, and there's a paradise, an oasis, all the water they could want. It says Elim had 12 springs, 70 palm trees, a place of great refreshment. Key question, one of the most amazing things in the Bible. How far is Elim from Mara? The Bible doesn't tell us, but if you get out maps, you'll find it on the map. It's 5 miles away. Basically from here to Qumran. They were sitting complaining in the desert because they had no water. And 5 miles down the road, God had the oasis for them. They're complaining. They're about ready to give up because all they can see is what's surrounding them. All they can see is their problem. And they don't see the oasis that God has right down the river. So many times, we stop too soon. We're ready to give up. We're ready to throw in the towel. We want to blame God, blame everybody else for all of our problems. And we give up. When the oasis is right down the river. The point is, don't quit. Don't give up. Don't give in to despair and frustration, because that's what Satan wants you to do. He wants you to look at the problems and focus on the problems and say, there's no way out. It's like Job's wife, curse God and die. But if we won't give up, Elim's right there. Second question, how do you get from Mara to Elim? How do you get from the place of disappointment and discouragement and bitterness to the place of blessing? Keep on going. 5 miles down the road, you've got to keep moving ahead. Keep trusting God. It doesn't say that God suddenly brought about a great oasis for them there. He gave them some good water to keep them going because the oasis was right down the road. The only way you get from Mara to Elam is you keep on going. The only way you get from disappointment and discouraging to delight is to keep on going spiritually in your life. And so often, it's easy for us to say in our human nature, "Oh, I don't feel like praying. I don't feel like trusting. I don't feel like giving. I don't feel like serving. I don't feel like worshiping. I'm just going to stay home this morning and sleep in, and I'm just going to give in to my problems." You would never think of calling your boss up and say, "You know what, my heart's just not in working this morning. I don't think I want to work. I really feel like I have to stay home and watch TV. That's what I feel like doing." Your boss is either going to say, "Fine, why don't you just watch TV for the rest of your life? Don't bother coming in again." Or he's going to say, "I don't care what you feel like. You get in here. There's work to be done." But spiritually, so many times we complain and say, "Well, I really don't feel like it. Don't feel like serving God. Don't feel like worshiping. Don't feel like praying. I really don't feel like reading my Bible. After all, that show's coming on here in a few minutes." And so many times we live our life spiritually on the basis of feeling. Keep on going. It may be that you're living in a Mara. You had a mountaintop experience sometime in the past, but right now you're facing the discouragement, the defeat, the frustration, the anger, the bitterness, the resentment. Because success will be often followed by failure. Service will be followed by forgetfulness. But shortages also are followed by gratefulness. When we turn to the Lord in our times of discouragement and defeat, and we keep on going, God can bring us to that place of great blessing. God's solution here at Mara was a tree. Piece of it. In our lives today, the answer also is a tree. The cross. Jesus, who died on the cross, who we've sung about this morning. We've sung about how great he is. He's our atoning sacrifice. We've sung about him coming. We understand that Jesus, Hebrews tells us, understands what it's like to go through discouragement, defeat. He understands thirst. He understands pain. He understands fear. He was tempted in all points like as we are. He went through this so that he would be able to comfort us. And that's why we turn to him, because he understands what we're going through. You say, "Oh, nobody else can understand." Maybe you could talk to one of us here in the room and we wouldn't understand the hurt or pain or discouragement, but Jesus does. And he wants to restore us. He wants us to keep going so he can take us to the place of great blessing. But far too often we give up too soon. The Jews had seen God work so miraculously, but 3 days they gave up and were complaining. When if they'd just gone 5 miles more, they would have gotten to the oasis. In our lives, we know how God has worked. We've seen. We can talk about the past, how God has worked in the past. But in the present, in the mundane, in the day-to-day events, so often we give in to discouragement. When God has a great blessing in store for us, if we don't give up. Let's keep on trusting God. Let's turn to God with our problems, our worries, and fears, and trust him for a great blessing. Let's pray together. Father, today we understand that one day we will stand face to face before you. And we want to hear you say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Sadly, sometimes we're not faithful. We lack faith and we give up. We give in to fear and discouragement and depression and all the tricks that Satan brings to us. But just as you worked through Moses and you had already provided a great oasis 5 miles down the road, Lord, we don't want to give up too soon. We want to keep on trusting you, even in the difficult days of our life, to see you bring about continued blessing, continued victory. Help us, Lord, not to be discouraged this week, but to be full of faith